Welcome to the fourth webcast of the PBC Morning Dawn Study Group at Padma Samye Ling. Today we'll be discussing the fourth chapter of the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, the Buddhist Path, which is entitled Taking Refuge. So we'll begin with opening prayers. Samanta Vajra, Vajrasattva, Pramana Vajra, Sri Singha, Padmakara, the 25 king and subjects, So, Zor, Nuk, Nyang, and 100 Tirtans and others, the lamas of the Kama and terminal lineages, to you I pray. The supreme tradition of the glorious Buddha Padma Samye, which is the essential, extraordinary view and doctrine of the early translation school, you keep alive and spread by the light of wisdom. Lord of Dharma, great Khenpo, I pray at your lotus feet. In the palace of the Ogmen Dharmadhatu, the essence of all the Buddhas of the three times, the one who shows clearly the Dharmakaya of my own mind, we pray to the Honorable Root Guru, glorious root teacher, precious one, dwelling on the lotus seat on the crown of my head. Hold me with your great kindness, and bestow the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind. Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi. So we're beginning today's discussion group. We're going to be talking on the fourth chapter from Rinpoche's book, Khenpo Rinpoche's The Buddhist Path, which begins on page 23. And so the subject is taking refuge. And kind of the main points of the kind of first section that we're going to be going over are really what it is to take refuge and looking a little more at the outer meaning of refuge. And so basically the main points that Rinpoches go across are that how refuge is taking the first step in practicing Buddhism in all the Buddhist traditions, be it the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and that the seed or cause of taking refuge is that closeness feeling and interest in what are known as the three objects of refuge, which are namely the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then they go over a little more on what the outer meaning of them are. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's really the first main points.
Directly from the book, the first point is, the first step in practicing Buddhism, according to the three traditions of Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, is to take refuge. The seed or cause for taking refuge is a feeling of interest and closeness to the three objects of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. On the outer level, the Buddha is the person who gave the teachings. He is the guide. The Dharma is the teachings. It is a guidebook that describes where to go. The Sangha are the beings who follow the path described by the Dharma. One of the things that came up for me while I was reading, I was thinking about the quality of refuge, because I think, particularly for people who are new to this, like myself, one of the things that can almost become a little confusing is how, when one's taking refuge on an outer level, we're making a prostration or however we take refuge, in something very physical that's considered in front of us, that's considered very external. But then, we're going to go into this a little bit later, about how there's the inner level too, and all the different levels, which makes it not as external. But so what's the kind of quality that one takes, particularly when you're looking at the outer level of refuge, that not only respects that outer level of the Buddha and the Dharma and the sangha, but that then also respects the fact that we're going to be sinking into all these different levels.
I don't know, it seems to me it's definitely recognizing that they're connected.
Mm-hmm.
That on the that really outer inner is connected. And so I don't know, in this case, I mean, ultimately the Buddha said we all have Buddha nature and we all can realize that, all beings without exception, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, but because we do have ignorance and ego clinging and that we are obscured, then we have something to look to and to move our mind toward. So in this case we have Buddha Shakyamuni, who is the expression in this world of all these inherent beautiful qualities that everyone has. And out of that limitless compassion of Buddha Shakyamuni is all of the teachings are expressions of his wisdom and compassion. Mm-hmm. And all of those beings who've taken those teachings to heart and practiced them. And like Rinpoche's mentioned, whether they're other ordinary people or those who, the arhats and bodhisattvas and all of the fully realized Buddhas, the noble sangha, we have their support. It's like kind of that guidance and that support and these clear, kind of reliable instructions to put to use. So it's kind of that we're realize they themselves are expressions of those beautiful inner qualities shining forth, but ours are a little more obscured. So then we have these beautiful examples and these living lineage masters and all of those things to connect with on the outer. I think that's what it means by outer. These are the things coming that we have to look toward and begin to connect with those. I mean, I'm sure if anyone else has.
Yeah, that just reminded me of something nice that I read in this Illuminating the Path. Just kind of, on this topic of refuge, that just right in the very beginning, there's a nice quote of Vimalamitra that says, when we clearly know the suffering of samsara, as well as the qualities of enlightened beings, then we can go for refuge. So it's just kind of, it's really to the point, but it's just so beautiful. It made me kind of imagine that, through duality mind, we have this gap. We see a gap between ourselves and enlightened beings, and there is, if we have duality mind, there is a gap. But this process of taking refuge is this first step of closing that gap, of seeing, there is samsara, there is suffering, there are sentient beings, and there are enlightened beings who have totally removed that and totally, fully touched that Buddha nature, and completely revealed that without, ever going back. And so that taking refuge is really like that, acknowledging that and seeing, wow, this is something extraordinary and something that I'd like to do too. It's kind of the bridging the gap for the first step.
And I think it's really like a really important part is that what you said in that first statement, like seeing samsara clearly. And that's on an outer level, like we need to take refuge. If we have these troubles, we have these ways we get caught in ups and downs, and good times, bad times, if we have this fluctuating based on our grasping, there's no other choice but to take refuge in something that's reliable, stable. I mean, if we don't see the ups and downs of life as being a problem, or if we think it's unavoidable, then we won't go for refuge anyway. Because we think that's just how it is. There's nothing stable in life. But then if we see, is there something stable in life? Is it possible to have a complete, lasting, unchanging happiness to benefit all beings? Then if we see that as a possibility, like you said, or Vimala Mitra said, we see these enlightened qualities, that is possible, then it becomes a very strong urge. Well, I'm not stable yet, they're stable. Then it's just a question of relying on something like, oh, how can I actually actualize that myself? And refuge is very practical, outer level refuge. What other option do we have if we're not stable already?
And it seems like that is that first moment of moving from it being external to it being more internal, because it is external until you start to see, like, that you can see it in yourself a little bit, you know, that, oh, I do have Buddha nature a little bit, you know, and then a little more, until, you know, along the path the whole way. So that's that, to me that's that process of moving from the external to the internal.
What you both were saying, it sounds like the Four Noble Truths first are studied to understand the suffering, and then the path, you begin and you take refuge. So what Vimala Mitra said, first you understand the suffering, which is from like the Four Noble Truths, and the last is the path. And then you take refuge and join the path.
I think what both of you all said, I mean, it's from the outer level, like, I think here you can really distinguish between the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Tantrayana, and make it as complex or deep as you want to go, because within the Vajrayana there's the outer, the inner, the secret, the ultimate. That's just the Vajrayana. But I think the basis of refuge, like Laya was saying, like you guys were saying, is we need help. You know, like, we're not enlightened. You know, we're struggling. And from the Hinayana point of view, you take refuge in the symbolic outer three jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. As an external thing, that's the object. And then the duration is, for example, for this lifetime. You take refuge for this lifetime, and the scope is, the reason, the motivation is because you fear the sufferings of samsara, because you're in trouble. You fear samsara and all the bad things that can happen there, so you take it that way. But then once you get to the Mahayana, it's already a different thing, because the object is like the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the Nirmanakaya. The duration is until you attain enlightenment. You know, complete enlightenment. Forever. So you take refuge from now until I attain enlightenment. That's when you take refuge. And then the motivation is not just for yourself because you fear the suffering of samsara, but because all beings are in trouble and going through the difficulties. So I take refuge until I attain complete enlightenment and lead all beings to that state of enlightenment. So it gets, like, in that sense, like Lodro's question, it gets, you know, deeper and deeper and deeper. It's not like they're separate things, but it's just like, you know, then you can keep going there from like the Vajrayana, you know, into the Vajrayana view. But basically we know we won't take refuge in money, because we've tried and it doesn't work, you know. We can't take refuge in something unstable. So ultimately you have to take refuge in something that's beyond samsara, because you can't take refuge in samsara. So the only thing beyond samsara is, well, the nature of one's own mind is always beyond samsara, but the one who fully realizes that through the wisdoms and the kayas is a fully enlightened Buddha. That's what you have to take refuge in.
The thing I was thinking of is connected with what you were reading, was that how this ties back in with those three kinds of faith, or three kinds of devotion. That you have that inspiration, that aspiration, and then the certainty, and so you take refuge. So it's very, very closely connected. All these topics really, like with the refuge, they all support each other.
Maybe elaborate? I'm curious, like when the different levels are.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of these kinds of fundamental teachings that, like Dara's pointing out, how there's refuge. I mean, how the refuge is connected with Four Noble Truths in terms of seeing suffering and its cause, seeing the path, you know, and its fruition, and so you take refuge. And then just the same with the three kinds of faith, that, you know, you're inspired by, say, seeing the Buddha, you aspire to be like him. You know, you have this conviction after you really look into the Dharma that it's actually true, and you see noble beings who are following it, and so you have this certainty that yes, this is something I can take refuge in.
Definitely.
And it's just so profound. I mean, just like what we're all saying, like you can see Rinpoche say, also in this Illuminating the Path book, at the very end, the last point they make is that refuge is such a profound practice that really it could be your only practice, and you would achieve the full result only through this practice. And it's just really, wow, you know, like everything we're saying, you can kind of see why that's true, because it's really like this umbrella that does kind of hold all the essential meaning of Buddhism and the Dharma and the Path. Like it's really everything in a sense.
The English word refuge, right? It's a shelter we seek. I mean, somebody could be in the dictionary, but it's the shelter you seek in times of need, right? It's a refuge, right? Or something like that. Right? But, getting to the point of realizing the only use, you know, the only activities or thoughts that are going to provide you with this safe haven, this place to find respite, are going to be within the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha somehow, right? So you sort of give up, like you said, give up the idea that something other than within that ambit, or whatever you would say, is going to give you what you need, you know, money or alcohol or, you know. So it's sort of like a promise you're making, is that I will go to these things, I will make an effort to look at my Lama, look at my Sangha, and listen, read the Dharma to find the answers, solace, or at least comfort. Yeah?
It's beautiful too, because the Sanskrit word Dharma translates directly to protection. I mean, I've seen it translate a number of ways, but one of them, I think particularly even in the book here, either in the Buddhist Path or Illuminating the Path, you know, it translates to protection. Right there, yes. On page 23.
Yeah, and then refuge is also translated as protection, and I think it's in this book. So it's just beautiful, just like that sense of why is it a protection, and it's really that, like what you're saying is that or they'll use the word infallible, they're infallible, like all these other things that we might really try and just keep trying, you know, but they really, at some point we see they really don't work. And that with contemplation and really looking at the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha and why, they're really like unfailing, you know. I love that word that you usually use in the prayer.
And I think like what Anne talked about too, the way that the devotion and interest, like that element too, as much as how vital that is. And the more we look at the Buddha on any level, it just inspires, and all the Buddha's qualities and life stories and previous lives, and then all the different levels of Buddha, you know, outer, inner, secret, whatever. And the same with the Dharma, all the words of the Buddha, all the meanings, all the three baskets, I mean everything, you know, just the more we become familiar, all the Sangha, their life stories, their qualities and abilities, and I mean just all of that, just like you said, I mean it's just so complete, like within Buddha, Dharma, Sangha holds everything on every level, and then inspires like that devotional, like thing that just opens.
And I think that's why it can be a complete path, is because of that. It's because that's what we're trying to do, is really open fully, you know, our hearts and our minds, and that's what that feeling that you're talking about, or like that inspiration and devotion and appreciation, which Rinpoches always remind us of, you know, are encompassed within refuge.
And that confidence to stay open and live in your softness, Yeah, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like anything else that we would look to, there's always maybe this edge of how can I be sure. So it's in those times of need, if you have a place that you can go with ultimate confidence and know that for thousands of years these teachings and it has, have really brought people to other places and staying open in that softness even in all kinds of moments. That's not something you're going to find at work. You know what I mean? Or any other places that we have gone in the past to find that feeling.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of follow up too on what Laya was saying too, in terms of seeing how.
I shouldn't say that.
But just that whole sense of that the more you explore the Buddha, the Dharma, and the sangha, it's like endlessly rich. You can never really get to the end of the Dharma. There's always more to uncover in terms of one's own mind and heart. There's always more. It's limitless. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And when you connect with that, it's like, I always love when, like we've all seen, I think we've all taken refuge here. But, when you see somebody who they're like, oh, I'm taking refuge, like I want to take refuge like on Saturday or whatever, like everyone who comes through here, and that feeling and that quality, it just has, I think the essence of refuge. Somebody's like, they're excited, they're uplifted, you see them after they take refuge, they have a new name, it's like a birthday, they feel like it's the beginning of the end, it's the beginning of the end of all this wandering, and you see people and you feel their, like, it's just such a happy thing, and I think that's the essence of refuge, even if we talk about all the different levels and depths and details, but the essence is, if we remember that and we connect with that, and like, why are people so happy when they take refuge? They're so happy because the chains are falling, it's like this story in Tibetan, just a really quick story of this bandit who he was going through maybe I won't tell correctly, but he's going through the town, he's a robber, he's a bandit, he steals something. He steals something from the town and he runs and people chase after him, he runs to escape, and he goes and hides under this bridge where these harmful spirits live. And so he wasn't particularly religious or had no really faith in the three jewels, but then these night was falling and he was hiding under there, and these beings came back and they said, oh, look at this one, easy prey, lunch or whatever. So they're going towards him and he realized, oh no, I'm done for it. But then he thought, and he heard all the people taking refuge in the three jewels in the town, and he had heard that, and he just, out of his panic and terror, he said, I take refuge in the three jewels, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha, over and over. And the second they heard that, all those malevolent beings, they screamed, they said, oh no, this one's under the protection of the three jewels. We have no power. And they just ran in terror, because the power of the three jewels, of protecting, like you said, the word Dharma. But anyway, so you're protected, when you really take refuge, even if you die, you're protected because you have you just have the vast view,
And to kind of that point, like how you mentioned when we take refuge, like when we take the formal, make that connection with the lineage, and have that, but then how taking refuge is the gateway to all Buddhist practice, and no matter what we're doing, we always start every session taking refuge. And like that point, even if it's just like a simple line, but first I always say, the four thoughts, thinking of that, but then always thinking of all these qualities of our situation, with like the four thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma, or the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then how taking refuge is not only in our life begins this beautiful path, but every session, every day, how that, it's like, again, it's that doorway that opens up for our session and our practice, and like opens and softens our heart and mind and reminds us of our joy and devotion and courage and commitment and our inspiration and what our kind of redirecting, correcting our goal, and then beginning our practice with that, and then with the bodhicitta, and then the particular practice, but kind of the way, like that whole, even if it's like just a few lines, it's still, we're not just saying those words, but really connecting with that beautiful meaning that's so lush and full, and then kind of the way that just really hones in. Also, I just thought to mention, we're getting kind of, maybe just have about 5 or 10 more minutes, so maybe we just kind of go over the next section of the chapter. And I was thinking, our points don't necessarily cover the whole chapter, should I just go through the basic points of the rest? Or?
Yeah, basic points of the rest is good.
Okay.
Please do.
So the next section we're going through, Rinpoche is talking more on the inner meaning of what it is to take refuge, and how that the inner level is of taking refuge is more connecting and relating to our own mind, and how the Buddha is the primordial nature itself, one's own pure awareness, or the absolute Buddha. It's always there from beginningless time, our very nature, primordial nature, and how the Dharma is what happens when we connect to that nature and maintain all the qualities of our mind's primordial nature, and radiate that and breathe that with all beings. And then went over some of the word meanings of Dharma, and the inner meaning of sangha, and then went over again looking at one word meaning of inseparable, and looking at the inseparable clarity and emptiness of the mind, and how that's connected with skillful means and wisdom that's always present with everything that's arising, and the nature, and that having that faith and closeness to the true nature. And then they continue just kind of going over who takes refuge, and how anyone with joyful interest and devotion to the three jewels can go for refuge. And how long do we take refuge? Until we actualize our Buddhahood, at which point we become an object of refuge. And then they conclude the chapter with kind of the ceremony of the tradition and the lineage by which we actually affirm and connect with the living lineage of Buddha Shakyamuni, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and go over some of the main points of the actual refuge ceremony, and kind of stress the importance how bodhicitta is a really essential element of that. Those are kind of the main points for the rest of the chapter.
Maybe I'll just read the second point. The three refuges also have an inner meaning related to the mind. The mind's primordial nature is totally pure, clear, and enlightened from beginningless time. One's own pure awareness is the primordial Buddha. Buddha actually means the perfect understanding that is free from all deluded and dualistic thinking. This is the absolute Buddha. Maintaining the qualities of the primordial nature and radiating them to all sentient beings is the inner meaning of taking refuge in the absolute Dharma. The inner sangha is also contained within the mind. This refers to the inseparability of clarity and emptiness as the true nature of the mind. Clarity and emptiness are always present, and that is the meaning of the absolute sangha.
It's interesting, it's not like all these descriptions of nature of mind, and saying that is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha.
Particularly with all these different levels, are they more accessed based on the depth of our practice, or is it more about like the way that we're, like if we're looking at it like a Vajrayana versus, maybe not so much versus, but like in contrast to like a more Mahayana view, is that where it comes into play more in how the teachings approach it, or does it really have to do with, the outer is the most obvious, that's where your practice is going to make it obvious, then from there the inner becomes more obvious, then like the secret is, how is it that they relate to each other in that way?
But I think it's definitely a spectrum of subtlety. So if our mind is really tense and holding really tightly, then all we have available is what's very obvious, because our mind is being held so tightly. And as the grasping, even if it's for a minute or for longer, as the grasping lessens, then more inner, more subtle workings of causation, of how our mind is working, become more apparent to our mind, and become more interesting to our mind, to actually pay attention to those things as well. But definitely a spectrum of subtlety. I know in this Illuminating the Path, they said that outer refuge is the 3 jewels, and then they divide it into inner refuge, secret refuge, ultimate refuge. So there's that inner refuge is the 3 roots. Secret refuge is the inner, like how the element, or Sa Long Tigle, how the inner structures of our body, when in terms of more subtle levels of our body structure, how we use those to recognize our primordial nature. And then the ultimate level is our primordial nature, not relying on any support, but like effortlessly accessing how our mind is when it's balanced without any grasping. It's definitely a function of how much grasping is happening in our mind, or if there is no grasping, with what degree of refuge makes sense to us in that time.
And so it sounds like from what you're saying, in this second point, that the intermeaning Rinpoches are really emphasizing, at least in this book, is that innermost, like the absolute, the ultimate. And they're talking about the Buddha being our pure awareness itself, the Dharma being the natural qualities that are just radiating, and then that the sangha, the absolute sangha, is the inseparability of clarity and emptiness. Which I thought it was nice that you included that here on the, kind of under these concepts and terms on this sheet, because for me it was helpful just to read that the sangha, the absolute sangha, is defined as the all-pervading, all-encompassing quality of the mind. Sometimes, anyway, I just thought that helps sort of fill out that definition of what is the absolute sangha.
And so that description comes from His Holiness Tuchen Rinpoche's like condensed explanation of the relative and absolute levels of taking refuge, which is from Illuminating the Path. And then there's 2, the inner and secret. It's really interesting because here in this Buddhist Path, they did the most outer and most inner. And then it's good that we know what's in between too, because if we think we can go from the most outer to the most inner, and that's all, usually it's a little bit of a developing, have to become more subtle. It's hard to go from dense grasping to no grasping as a path. So it's interesting, that point.
These aren't things we do anyway, right?
What do you mean?
Well, I don't know. Seems to me that it has to do with practice. And like you said, your mind is a certain way, and you practice, and then it gets more flexible, and the nadis get unknotted, and you purify, and then it gets, it's not something the outer refuge, we go and we take it, right? We can do that. And all these other things seem that they have to develop through causes and conditions.
So it is something we do.
Oh, well, absolutely, with courage and commitment. But it's not like that. You go for the goal, you have to do that.
And that seems kind of part of, like you said, there's these the absolute level and the outer level, and then there's that path of realization to unfolding. But that, especially with that last part on how when we take refuge in the sangha on the absolute level as all appearances and their nature, all the emptiness and appearance, skillful means and wisdom in a way, to me it seems like that really touches on how, to the best of our ability, when we're really practicing and touching home, that realizing we're working with our own mind, on no matter where we are, whatever our capacity is, or how that might fluctuate, or that we're always working with our own mind. trust in its absolute nature.
And that way everything becomes a teaching. I mean, if
Yeah,
we're
exactly,
working
yeah.
with our experience with that type of,
Right.
engaging with it that way, like everyone we see becomes the sangha because they're support for our maintaining that understanding.
Right.
You know, or just everything really. So that's pretty, that's amazing.
And I think that's also why this is chapter 4.
Mhm.
Because chapter 1 is saying we need to calm the mind,
Mhm.
taming the mind. Chapter 2 is how is our mind when it's all being conditioned by all of its grasping. Chapter 3, what's the nature of our mind when it's not grasping onto everything. And then chapter 4, so when we recognize this difference, like a totally balanced mind, it's effortless and available, balanced, versus this grasping mind that's always struggling, then what's the path? How do we go from where we are grasping to how we can be when we're not grasping? So it really makes sense that this is, it is all the mind, and it's really beautiful how Rinpoche has very thoroughly established that up to this point in the book, I think, very clearly.
Yeah, and how could it be otherwise, you know? That it's one's own mind that recognizes this. It's one's own mind that recognizes the outer 3 jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. One's own mind that recognizes the, you know, the inner 3 jewels, or the channels, winds, and essence elements. One's own mind that works with the 3 Vajra states and the Vajrayana, and one's own mind that's the nature of one's own mind too. So it's like Drapa said too, the subtlety of, you know, you can only be aware of what you're aware of. You know, so if you're not aware of the luminous nature of your mind, or you don't fully recognize the nature of your mind, then you work with your mind to become aware of that by following the path and taking refuge according to your capabilities until you will. You'll include all 4 or all those types of refuge in one moment, because you'll be at that stage where you recognize that and you're aware of that. So.
Or even, and I think we have to wrap it up pretty soon, but even just the title of the book. I mean, here it was changed to the Buddhist Path. But what is the Buddhist Path? It was the title Rinpoche gave. Opening to our primordial nature. Beautiful.
And the light of the 3 jewels.
And the light of
That's right.
That's
the
where it
3
started, that's the light of the 3 jewels.
Oh, it used to be the light of the 3 jewels.
That's what it was at first, yeah.
It says
Yeah, no, they came up with that too, because everybody suggested a title, and they said, oh no, Anne, and I so that's Mahamudra. That's oh, okay. And so, anyway, they said, no, let's call it the light of the 3 jewels.
Yeah.
So then it has continued to
It's
evolve. Yeah.
This is what we're talking about. Yeah. Light of the 3 jewels. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Opening us to our primordial nature.
The Buddhist Path.
The Buddhist Path. We will dedicate the merit, and of course there's so rich, and this opens up infinite, you know, richness in our practice and study and reflection and meditation. Om Swasti Vidyayantu Chosum Sasum Chitu Padmaju Inde Sodep Tuje Tujenji Kenchin Balin Chera Drubeku Yojo Dendro Zezanta Jinsho Om Swasti Choku Nanta Lungku Jenresi Choku Bajun Yabyan Tujetu Bela Bazang Japsho Gyansika Dendro Bende Dandu Nushar Shog Gajri Rawe Kowe Shinkansu Bendang Dewa Malu Jungwene Chenrezi Wan Tenzin Japsoyi Jabe Gaje Badu Tenjoji Om Swasti Sewan Rinsen Beme Jinlauchi Dunye Drube Laksan Noiden La Shedun Golo Sumji Bajote Sanchen Nakam Jule Nam Jasho. By this merit may all obtain omniscience,
May it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of earth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. May the sole source of benefit and happiness, the Buddha's teachings, remain for a long time. And may the victory banner of the lives of the noble ones, the holders of the teachings, remain firm. May all sentient beings always be joyful. May all births into the lower realms cease forever. May the wishes of all the bodhisattvas and all the Buddhas swiftly reach fruition. At this very moment, for the peoples and nations of the earth, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard, but rather may pure conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme good fortune and well-being always arise. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it may it be generated, and those who have it may it never diminish, but always continue increasing. May the great tradition of Khenpo Shantarakshita, Lopam Padma Samye, and Dharma King Tritsun Detsen increase and spread throughout the three-realm world. May the appearance of the three jewels in the mind streams of beings remain inseparable and bring sublime well-being throughout the three times. Deity, mantra, and dharmakaya are the nature of appearance, sound, and awareness, the pervasive kaya and wisdom display of the Buddhas. May practitioners of the profound and secret great perfection remain inseparable from the innermost one-taste awareness of wisdom mind.